So let's get started. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, just a quick little background on us. So my name is Craig McInnes. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO here at MyCaribou. And it's the only global partnering hub built specifically for medical device manufacturers and distributors that will help you accelerate your growth through stronger partnerships. So you can match and connect with over 20,000 distributors and 20,000 manufacturers in the platform, navigate global market data from over 100 countries, collaborate with your existing partners, including sales forecasts, file sharing, discussions, etc., goal setting, and then monitor and measure your global market performance. So it is a platform for manufacturers, it's a platform for distributors, and we also have trade associations, market consultants, and regulatory consultants on the platform now as well. Let me introduce you today to today's speakers, on this topic. So first, Mark Lesselroth, President and CEO of Bioport USA, which is a consulting firm that facilitates market entry for life sciences companies into the massive US market through services like market research, legal, regulatory, reimbursement, and of course, sales and marketing, which Mark will be covering today. Mark has been a featured presenter at many conferences, including Medtech, and is a peer reviewer for the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And Mark is also an active participant in several life science clusters, both in the US and in Europe. Stéphane Toupin, over the last 27 years, Stéphane has gained a wealth of experience in the medtech and pharma industries with AstraZeneca, BioVail, and Novo Nordisk. Stéphane founded Dawa Medical in 2015 to collaborate with foreign medtech manufacturers to enter and succeed in the massive US market. Dawa Medical is a US initial importer and FDA agent with warehousing and distribution capabilities. Dawa also offers services for the Canadian and Latin American markets. I will provide contact information for Mark and Stéphane at the end of today's presentation. They were kind enough to provide their emails for you to reach out afterwards as well. They are both great resources, great assets to help you succeed in the US market. Just again to reiterate, if you have any questions as we move along, please put those into the Q&A panel or the chat panel, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Our objectives here today, I won't go through all these bullets, but we do want to cover off some key areas of sales and marketing and distribution options in the US market. And I'll have Mark go first today, and then Stéphane, and then they'll both join in for the Q&A at the end. So poll question, Angela, we've got a question about, we always like to know as we're starting the presentation, how many of you are actively selling into the US market? So simple yes, no. Are you actively selling in the US market? So we can get a sense of how many of you are not here yet and getting ready to enter. And we'll see the results come back up here momentarily. Okay, we're a little roughly half and half, a little more. So 55% yes, 45% no. So excellent. That's helpful in terms of the background now. So let me just bring up this slide and I'll give control here to Mark. You're now controlling your own slides, which is great. And I'll pass it over to you, Mark.
Wonderful. First of all, I want to thank you, Craig, and MyCaribou for this great opportunity to once again share my insights with the folks that you've invited. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to where you are around the world. This is probably the most interesting topic because while regulatory reimbursement are must-haves, at the end of the day, of course, everyone's interested about selling and how to sell into what I consider to be probably the most difficult vertical market in the United States. And one of the questions I always ask is, how risk averse are you? Because nothing ventured, nothing gained is definitely a part of the mantra here in the United States. And it definitely does involve a certain amount of risk. Okay. Can I go to the next slide? Oops, it is. Sorry about that. I hit too many times. So I wanted to start out my presentation with a famous quote from If we have anybody from Germany on, they'll certainly know who Willy Brandt was. And he said that if I'm selling to you, I speak your language. If I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen, which of course is then you have to speak German. And the point I'm just trying to illustrate with this slide here is that selling in a foreign market, and certainly selling in the United States, you have to take into consideration who you're selling to, the culture, the nuances, the mindset. You cannot try to sell in the United States like you are in your home country. It just doesn't work. I've heard it one too many times where, well, this is how we do it in France. I said, well, that's great, but when in Rome, do as the Romans. Okay, I don't know. All right, so some of the trends impacting US sales. I'm just going to pull these all up in the interest of time, and then I'll go through them real quick. Emerging countries are creating low and cost production, creating competition. We've known that for a long time. A lot of American companies continue to produce things overseas, although I will tell you that in light of COVID, that trend is changing. The previous administration and even the current administration is putting greater pressure on manufacturers, both in the biotech and the medtech sector, to produce things here in light of problems with the supply chain. So something for you to think about. There are some tougher regulatory hurdles that are increasing costs, and obviously money does play a key role here. So that's something to be mindful of as well when you look at the US market. The next one is probably the biggest one, where we're seeing a shift to consolidation. More and more hospitals are looking to maybe buy just from larger organizations that have made strategic acquisitions. So Welch Allyn, for example, a large company some of you may be familiar with, especially in the diagnostics area, they were bought by Hill-Rom about 2 years ago, which is a very large company that's known for their beds, hospital beds. And then recently Baxter bought all of them, and Baxter's made some other key strategic acquisitions. The goal being that Baxter now can go to a hospital and say, we own the hospital room. So anything and everything that you could potentially find in a hospital room, Baxter can sell to you. And that's becoming very attractive to hospitals who are looking to streamline the purchasing process. The other problem is hospitals are hemorrhaging money. Some hospitals in the United States have gone out of business due to the fact of COVID and how they just weren't able to survive due to the constraints put on, predominantly because there were no elective surgeries allowed. All right, next slide. Up and of course Buy American. That is something that, again, the previous administration, but the current administration is also putting a heavy hand on. And so for those of you that are already selling here, that's wonderful. I don't know if you have a US office, but it could be something as simple as establishing a US office while still producing your products in your home market, but selling it through the US office that could maybe make it look like Buy American. Real quick, how do hospitals buy? We have what's called an open system and a closed system, and it's somewhat, how should I say, confusing, because the open system actually is the one that's closed and vice versa. And I'll explain to you after the fact if you want to look at it. But the bottom line is that not unlike in Europe, where you have some hospitals, or many hospitals, I think, that a manufacturer can sell direct to, that is beginning to happen a little bit in the US, but predominantly, I'd say, gosh, more than 90%, it's still through distribution. And that's because these large distributors, the likes of McKesson, Medline, Cardinal Health, Henry Schein, have spent years establishing long-term relationships with these hospitals. And of course, their business is to call on these hospitals day in and day out. But I just wanted you to see this slide to know that there are possibilities, but predominantly it is still through distributions and or group purchasing organizations. One of the things I think when you sell in the United States is just making that connection. I mean, it really is about relationships and working it with the individual sales channel partners, again, be it sales reps, be it distributors, understanding the purchasing folks at the hospital, basically also be in tune with the hospital administrator. So what happens is that purchasing decisions, generally speaking, in a hospital involve both the chief of a department, so let's say the chief of cardiology, and someone from hospital administration, because there is obviously the purchasing component of this. So I think it's important that when you go out there trying to sell your products, that you need to look at what's of importance to the doctor, but what's also of importance to the administrator. And of course, the administrator is going to look at things like time, money, cost, what is your reimbursement level look like, because they want to make sure that if something's going to come on board, that it definitely is something they can charge and make money off of. So we'll go through this. Stefan will spend a great deal of time talking more about the role of the distributor. I just wanted to put up this slide to basically make you aware of it. Be prepared to share in the spoils. Distributors in many US areas, both regional and national ones, are going to want a big chunk of money. So that means you need to price your products accordingly so that obviously there's some margin left over for you. And again, like I said, I'll let Stefan talk more about it when he takes over. Real quick, your brand versus partnerships. Most of the clients that I've dealt with have, because of their risk aversiveness, have decided to come into the market more under a strategic private label arrangement, where they're working with a reseller or a distributor, where the objective is to minimize their risk, but in doing so, they don't make as much money. That's the trade-off, right? So higher margins for the private label. They're going to provide their own marketing support. They have their own sales support people. What you're basically bringing to the table is your technology. For those companies that are looking to bring their product in under their own name, even if they go through, again, traditional sales channel, i.e. distributors, for example, for those that put more effort into marketing, they're the ones who are going to be more successful. There really is how should I put it, a symbiotic relationship between sales and marketing. This isn't just about having a great product with wonderful features and benefits and then signing an agreement with the distributor and then pat them on the back and say, good luck and good fortunes. Absolutely not. It is the role of the manufacturer to provide the distributor with as much marketing information, marketing intelligence to help them make their life a little bit easier. Excuse me. It is also the role of the manufacturer, if they're going out to the market under their own brand, to establish themselves as a brand player in the marketplace. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge for most of the international firms, that you may have developed a wonderful technology, but no one knows who you are. And so people on this side of the Atlantic may be a little risk averse to try something new, even if it's less expensive. Here we go, transition slides. So just a few slides here left in the time remaining. I just want to give you some stats. If you're wondering, well, great, Mark, if you're talking about marketing and branding, how much should I spend on it? This is a slide I put together from the US Small Business Administration that basically says you should be looking at 7 to 8% of your gross revenue. If you're brand new, you should be looking at closer to 10 to 12, which may seem like a large number for some of you, but the truth of the matter is that without having the necessary marketing tools in place to support the sales process, you just won't see the return on investment. And especially for those of you who are already selling here, you might be scratching your head and going, how do we improve our sales process? If we're at 10%, how do we get to 20%? And if you're not doing things in the marketing and branding arena, I'm telling you that that's where you're going to see the change. So real quick, let's put up a couple of slides here. So again, I won't spend too much time on this in the interest of time. Corporate branding really should be part of the priority. People buy from people they trust. People buy from brands they know. A great example was that during the pandemic, even though there were a lot of low-cost PPEs available, at the end of the day, 3M got the lion's share of the orders, especially from the federal government. Why? Because people, they had trust in the brand called 3M, and we're paying more for it. So, 3M made out quite well during the pandemic. The people who bought it, felt comfortable, and the people who bought, we'll say, no-name brands, unfortunately paid the price in many instances. While the cost was lower, it turns out that the materials were substandard, and it cost them millions and millions of dollars in loss. We've talked about the fact that there really has to be a symbiotic relationship, that the one goes in hand with the other. I just don't see how you can be successful in the US by focusing just on sales and sales alone in an effort to get your product introduced to, a highly intelligent marketplace. I mean, you're dealing with doctors. And one note I should make on that is that with physicians, they're going to be less interested in pure play advertising. What's going to attract them are clinical studies that have been published in peer-reviewed publications and perhaps presented by key opinion leaders at industry conferences. That's going to be the key, in my opinion, to get them interested in what you have to offer, especially if it's something new and innovative. The other marketing materials are really meant more to support the sales process for the distributor or the independent sales rep. Last slide here. Again, not unlike what I was saying about going to market with under your own brand or private label. This is more looking at it from a marketing and branding standpoint. The bottom line here is that it'll cost you less money, next to no money, if you private label it, but you still have a certain requirement to get FDA approval. However, the return on investment will be a lot lower. You're just not going to see it. I call it the 80-20 rule. I think that most people who've gone to market through private label have managed or mitigated their risk, but they're only getting maybe 20 cents on the dollar. And then after a period of time when they go, oh, wow, we're really having a lot of success here, then they try to go out on their own and face some of their own difficulties because they can't use the same distributors that the private label partner did. I think that is it.
Great. So let's just bring up the next poll question. Thanks, Mark. We're going to transition to Stefan here. There is a bit of a delay on the slides. I see what you were talking about. There we go. Okay, so what challenges are you facing as it relates to entering the U.S. market or succeeding in the U.S. market? You can choose several of these if you like to. So is it finding distributors? Is it reimbursement? Understanding who's buying your products and how? Establishing US-based KOLs or key opinion leaders, and communicating value proposition or others. So go ahead and choose the ones that are of most challenge to you today, whether you're in the market or you've started to think about the market and you're considering these challenges. And we'll give you a second to fill that out, and Angela will post the results here when they're ready. Interesting. So finding distributors, almost 60%, reimbursement 35, understanding product 35. So they're really all resonating. If you answered other here, feel free to put a question or a comment into the Q&A panel or the chat panel if you want to expand on any other challenges you're facing, and we'll try to address those in the Q&A session. All right, great. So let me just transition to the next slide here. And Stefan, I'll give you control. You should have that now. And we'll go through Stefan's slides, and then we'll move towards Q&A. Just as we're doing that, a reminder, any questions you have, please put them in the Q&A panel or the chat panel, and we'll get to those towards the end. Stefan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg and Mike Caribou. Nice presentation, Mark. So let me see. So one of the questions, obviously, that we get a lot is, how to get access to the right, manufacturing company or distribution network and distribution network. So it's coming from both sides, obviously, from the manufacturer of the distributor. So if we start with the manufacturing company and their perspective, my first question to them is always, are you sure that there's a market for your product? So it's nice to have, a product. If it's a me too, it's going to be way more difficult to enter the US market. If you have a very unique product, yeah, you probably have a better chance. But is there's really a market. And I think if you work with Mark, for example, he can work with you and try to find that out before, spending a lot of money and trying to enter the US market and leaving the market 2 years after because nothing happened. So I think that's probably very key. Also, you have to ask that question, what kind of sales structure are you looking for? And what I mean by that is that the US is pretty unique in that sense, where you will have a distributor who will be buying. So they will buy your product, they will stock, they will sell, they will invoice the hospital or the clinic or the OBL. But you have also a sales agent that only paid on commission, and they don't buy the product, they don't stock the product and ship the product. So you will have to do all the rest. And depending on the field of expertise, depending where your product is going to be sold, also it could be a mix of distributor and sales agent. For example, in interventional cardiology, it's easier to find a distributor who will cover multiple states. But in spine and orthopedic, that's totally different. You're probably going to need like 100 of them because there's a lot of smaller distributor or sales agent. So you will need a lot of those to cover all the US. So depending, of your product, depending who's going to prescribe that product or use the product, it's important to do that work. Some will ask for exclusivity. Some distributor will say, if you want me to take over your product for the state of New York, for example, or New Jersey, I need exclusivity. So are you ready to give that to distributor? Sometimes, like for example, again in spine, people, an agent or distributor will be working with specific hospital or specific physician. Then it's easier to get them, exclusivity for those physicians or for those hospitals, but not the entire state. But again, that's the work that you need to do to make sure you understand the US market, how for your product is going to be set up. By default, is it going to be regional or more national? It's very, very difficult. US is big. It's 325 million people. The 5 biggest states is New York, Florida, Illinois, Texas, California. So it's pretty spread, East Coast, West Coast, we tend to say. So sometimes some distributor will cover, like I said, just one state or a couple of hospitals. But to find a distributor, a buying distributor that will cover all the US, don't think about it. It's very, very difficult to find. Specialty versus full line. I think, Mark, I don't know if you have a word on this, but I think we discussed that before. And what's your take on that?
No, I agree. I think that, what you're talking about really does make a lot of sense. And I think that that's something they need to, take into perspective.
So on the distributor perspective, I'm trying to get this slide. Oh no, I'm sorry, I was not done. Reimbursement, and that's another point where you can talk to Mark, for example, but that's so key. A lot of companies approach us for sometimes for distribution, and when I ask them, well, do you have a CPT code? And they look, what are you talking about? Because product, are reimbursed most of the time under a procedure code, and you need to figure that out. Because if your product doesn't fit anywhere in the reimbursement, nobody's going to take that for distribution because it's going to be too difficult. The hospital will say, well, if it's not reimbursed, why will I buy this product and I will have to pay and lose money? So reimbursement is very, very key. It's not like, in Canada where it's a public system and then, the hospital has a budget at the beginning of the year and they use that budget to pay for everything. That's not how the US market works. So you need to, figure that out, obviously. Are you planning to have a inventory here in the US? If you're based in Germany, Australia, in Singapore, wherever, international shipping costs is very expensive right now. Since the pandemic, it's 2 times, 3 times what it was before. to have a small inventory in the US where, you know, the distributor or the 1099 can place an order there to ship to an hospital, it makes a lot of sense. And I see that people who do that have more success than when the distributor has to or place an order all the time in Germany, and then product has to be shipped here. It can get stuck at custom, you know, it could take 2 weeks. And then it's more expensive for the distributor. So it's less appealing for them. But when you tell them that, well, yeah, we have an inventory, a small inventory in Miami, for example, then, you know, it's more appealing for them. That's okay, then I can order smaller quantity and have them, you know, the next day or in 2 days. So that's something that people need to think about. And the last one on that slide is, are you all set with the FDA and customer regulation? And we just got a question regarding this. And like Mark said, you know, to get your product registered with the FDA, if it's a 510K, for example, that's one thing. But when you want to start shipping in the US, the FDA says if your buyer, let's say a distributor, is not registered with the FDA as an initial importer, you cannot ship to them. So FDA wants, you know, a US entity to be responsible of the traceability of the product. And that responsibility is also about reporting of recall, adverse event, and customer complaint. So most of the distributor, I would say probably 90% of the distributor and none of the agent, obviously, will register with the FDA because it's too expensive. You need standard procedure in place, and you can be audited by the FDA. Nobody wants to do that. So you need to work with a third party like us, for example, because we are registered with the FDA as an initial importer, and then we're going to cover you for all the US. So it doesn't matter if your distributor or the agent is not registered with the FDA, you don't have to care because we will cover you for that. But that's very important because we get at least every month, somebody is calling us because they have products stuck at custom because they forgot that part or they didn't know that part of the initial importer. So make sure that you understand all the regulation there. Sorry. Sorry, the delay to get the slide. For the distributor or the agent on their side, I think you do your research about the manufacturing company. Obviously, it's easy now just to Google and look and LinkedIn who's working there, but make sure you understand who they are. Make sure to understand, to ask a question about what we just discussed, the reimbursement, the inventory, the FDA status. You know, sometimes they are confused. Sometimes their product is not even registered. If it's a class 1 or class 2 or 510K exam, it's easy to do. They just have to register the establishment and list the product. So that's an easy task. But if they don't have that, and maybe it's going to be a 510K, then it's going to be a long process before they're ready to start selling in the US. What kind of training? You know, obviously there's some product that you just need minimal training, but if you have a spine product, who's going to do the training? Are they going to send somebody here to do the couple of first cases? You know, that's a question you need to ask. Do they have insurance? That's another big question mark sometimes for them. They don't understand. You know, they say, yeah, we have insurance, but on their certificate of the insurance, you need to make sure that the US is included there. And sometimes, you know, they will require you to also to have at least a general liability insurance, and sometimes product liability, which could be very expensive for a distributor because the way the insurance system is set up here, you know, even if you're just a distributor and you need a product liability insurance, they will put you in the same bucket as a manufacturing company. So that could be expensive. Make sure you understand the payment term. Is it, you know, upfront for the first shipment and then 50%, you know, at 30 days after? You know, that's stuff that you can deal with them. And the termination term, obviously, that's critical. What are you going to get? You know, if the company gets bought by another big one, are you going to get something out of it? If you've been working for 2 years And so you can negotiate something like, well, you're going to tell them, well, I need 6 months of the sales, you know, if you get bought by a bigger company. So stuff to discuss. And just be honest about the share of voice that you can give them. I see sometimes distributor or agent just take product, just take product. You know, be honest. You know, if you don't have the time, just say, you know, I pass because we're too busy. And just make sure the agreement is not one-sided. I see that all the time. Sometimes where you look at the agreement is all sided to the manufacturing company. Make sure that, you know, it's a win-win situation for everybody. And how to evaluate the potential partner. Obviously, if you're the manufacturing company, and you doing a discussion with distributor or agent, I just asking, you know, how many years they've been on that market, what, you know, how many reps do they have, what geography their coverage, the past performance. If they have names of physicians, they have a very good relationship. Sometimes I will ask them, I will say, well, if you get this product, who are you going to go see tomorrow morning? Because you know that they're going to buy from you. Any reference of past company that they work in the past, and how, you know, you can ask the distributor how that product that you have going to fit in their portfolio. Is it far outside, or it fit perfectly because they're already in OR, already talking with spine surgeon, and it could be just a good add-on. Again, I discussed that about asking the right question to the manufacturing company. Ask if they have, and I'm talking about the distributor perspective here. Name of KOL, you know, if they already selling in the US, do they have, you know, US KOL right now who's using the product? Any published data? Obviously, depending on the product, you know, if you're selling a hospital bed, you're probably not requiring this. But if you're selling more high-end stuff, make sure that they have some data to back up what the product does. And what's the intention of the company in the long term? If it's a single product company, you know that down the road, they're probably looking to get acquired. So make sure that the discussion was their intention. And if it's the case, well, you know, like I said before, make sure in the agreement you're going to get something out of it if they get bought by another company. Looking at my time here. So how to adapt your business plan to the US market? You know, Mark touched about this. What, you know, works in other countries doesn't necessarily work here in the US. I hear that all the time. People will say, well, you know, in Germany, we do that. Well, this is Germany. This is not, you know, the US. It's totally different. And US physicians prefer US KOL. So it's nice to have KOL in our country. But here, people will ask, oh, who's using it? You know, who's, you know, we can talk to about the product. So if you have, you know, KOL in other country, maybe they can make the connection with people that they know here in the US, because they know all, you know, each other. They go to the same convention, they do the same kind of procedures. They don't know. They must have people in the US that they know they can put a KOL into contact with people here. US physicians prefer US reference. So when people say, who's prescribing the product? Obviously, at the beginning, it's difficult to know, but it's the mindset. And like Mark said, you know, I think the US is a storytelling. They like a story behind the product. So it's not just about feature and benefit, but what's the story behind this? And, you know, to my last word is be patient. I see company expecting that in 6 months, they're going to sell, you know, a lot of their product, millions. That's not how it works. There's a lot of, you know, value analysis committee in each hospital. It can take months and months before a physician can be able in their hospital to prescribe the product or to use the product. So be patient and do your homework.
Okay, great. I'm just going to pause quickly, just remind everyone, we have a lot of questions, but please feel free to continue to add those. If we don't get through all the questions, we will respond afterwards and make sure you get an answer in the follow-up. So please feel free to add more, even though we do have lots. We tried purposely to leave quite a bit of time for Q&A in this session. Let me just pause on sharing this screen for a minute here, and we can just have a conversation here with the questions. So just one quick sort of administrative item. We will send a copy of this video today, the entire thing, including the Q&A. You will get a copy of the link to that. A few people have asked about whether that'll be available, and it will be afterwards, as well as the deck. So I'll start with some questions here, some of which were asked in advance. Stefan, I'm going to ask you this first one. It's a fairly broad question about supply chain channels in the U.S. So if you could explain, and obviously you actually are quite a few of these. So if you could just explain a little bit about how the model works in terms of what is an initial importer, what's a master distributor, what are GPOs, and any other sort of key players that you'd want to highlight. I know it's a pretty unique market that way. So maybe I'll ask you that first, then Mark can chime in.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's another session by itself, all those to answer all those. But like I said, initial importer is key with the FDA regulation. You need somebody here in the US who's going to be responsible of the traceability of the product. And like I said, most distributors, they won't do it. Obviously, if you deal with a major like Medline, whatever, that's not an issue because they are registered with the FDA. But and the master distributor, again, even for us, sometimes when we see a product that's entering the US, because we are their initial importer, and we see the product is unique, and there's a lot of 1099 that could be involved, we are sometimes in a position where we say, you know what, we're going to buy a small inventory from you, and we're going to use our network to sell across the US. Without exclusivity most of the time. So the company can still be looking, around to find distribution, but we can help them in that sense where, because, let's face it, for a foreign manufacturing company to deal with 1099, it's impossible because you're going to have to pay a lot of people. You're going to have to register the product in each hospital by yourself, under your company name. That's a nightmare. So, but that's, a discussion by itself,
And the sales agents typically, so you refer to 1099, which is really a tax kind of, it's an independent consultant basically. Yeah. I'm assuming they typically would not do any warehousing or storing a product. They're really just sales agents on the ground for you.
Yeah.
As opposed to distributors, which would tend to have some perhaps warehousing capabilities and inventory.
Where, for example, if we do that work, obviously we're not going to ask for a 30% margin. Like Mark said, it's going to be up to the 50 to 60% because we have to take that responsibility. And depending on the field of expertise, commission to an agent will range between 15 to 35%. So that's a lot. 35% is a lot, on that 50% margin. So.
Can you touch on GPOs quickly? I know we could probably do a whole session on group purchasing organizations and how those function in the US. And Mark, feel free to jump in on this as well, but just maybe a quick overview of GPOs.
Yeah, so a lot of hospitals, as you may know, are part of a group purchasing organization. So what's interesting with that is that obviously it's very rare that the GPO will put a new product on board, because it's new, they don't know how it's going to go. But at one point they would like to negotiate, a price. So the good thing about that is that if you put a product on the GPO, then that product will be available for a lot of hospitals at the same time. But usually I will say the company don't do that right away, because if you still have to figure out the pricing and because if you put a product on a GPO and you're working with distributor, well, it's possible that it's going to be good. The pricing will be good for the distributor in New York, but since the GPO has a hospital also in California, then you can be in a situation where that distributor in California is not happy with that pricing. So you just have to be, careful at the beginning. Mark, I don't know if you had something.
No, I think I agree with you. I think that it does get a little tricky, which is why I said at the beginning of my presentation that I think the US healthcare market is by far the most challenging because it's just not as straightforward. I think all too many times companies from overseas think, hey, I have a product, I'm going to sign up a distributor who's going to get my product sold, end of discussion. And there's so much more involved with it. And the GPO is an interesting one because there are distributors that are members of GPOs, but there are also individual medical device manufacturers that are also a member of GPO. And I think what you were alluding to, Stefan, where you have to be careful is that you're not competing with the distributor, because now all of a sudden the distributor is like, wait a second, you're offering this, at a GPO at price X, we're trying to sell it at price Y. So I'm not saying that you can't do both. You just have to be very thoughtful about how you go about doing it before you do it.
And would either of you, I don't know if you want to comment on the sort of the Veterans Affairs, military, there's a massive channel there as well. I don't know. I know we have companies on our platform that are specifically focused on Veterans Affairs, hospitals, and military purchases, which are significant. Do either of you have any comments on that as a potential channel?
So Bioport has a couple of subject matter experts. That's all they do is work with the DoD, the federal government, the VA. And I can tell you that it's very different trying to do business with the federal government, which of course ultimately is the VA. And for those of you who are listening who aren't familiar, the VA is a network of 171 hospitals around the United States, which are owned and operated by the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is of course the US federal government. And it's meant for vets, both men and women, because women, of course, now have served in the U.S. military. So the way in which you go about selling is quite different. Now you're talking about having a GSA contract. My experience with helping my clients sell their products to the VA is usually through getting them with the #1 distributor who is servicing the Veterans Department, and that is Cardinal Health. That's for what I'll call your run-of-the-mill product, or we'll say Me Too products, as Stefan referred to earlier. If you have something new and innovative, that gets interesting. There are opportunities where you can deal directly with the VA, and you might even get lucky and get a substantial contract. But even there, the way in which you go about selling it, promoting it, if you don't have someone that you're working with that knows how to do business with the US federal government, I think it's next to impossible. So that's one of the reasons why we offer that up as a service to help people walk through it, because it's just as much crossing the T's and dotting the I's from a bureaucratic standpoint and a paperwork standpoint, which is not something you will normally face in the in the civilian world.
All right, great. Let me switch gears a little bit. Mark, I'll ask you to comment on this one first, but and it's one I've heard a lot, is at what point in time does it make sense for an international med tech firm or a foreign manufacturer to have a company sales representative on site in the US? So I'm assuming here we're talking about we're selling through distributors, some, many, whatever. But at what point does it make sense to have some local representation on the ground to support that channel?
So if you are selling under your own brand name, my answer to that question is almost immediately. I think you really need to have someone, you want to have someone with feet on the ground. You open up a US local business entity. It doesn't have to be a huge office or a warehouse or anything. And you have that person there, because what will help is having someone who can negotiate or deal directly with the distributor, and or maybe go with the distributor on a call to the hospital if that's what's called for. It also serves a customer service role. So let's say the distributor has a complaint from the hospital, has an issue. It's a lot easier than to deal with someone who's in their same time zone than to try to deal with someone who's in a different time zone. So there's something to be said about having a local sales presence. In some instances, I would even say it would make sense for some companies to even have a VP of sales and marketing. So it's not just a sales representative, but it's a high-ranking person who represents the best interests of the company to steer and navigate the ship here in the US.
Okay, and Stefan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I've got a question for you.
No,
Okay.
it's perfect because I see the difference in the success of company. If they have somebody who's taking really care of the US, not sitting in an office in whatever, but have somebody here who can, drive that business, is obviously it's better.
Okay, there's a question I know you'd answered it, Stefan, online already, but I'll share it with everyone. So the question was, are that their devices, so this is a foreign manufacturer, their devices are US FDA registered, 510K exempt, but what other standards do we need to check before we get ready to export our devices to the US? And I know you'd mentioned, just a quick answer, maybe if you could share the answer, and then of course anybody can reach out to you afterwards if they have deeper questions on it.
Well, I had them to reach out to us at customerservices@dawaamedical.com. But like I said, product can get stopped at custom if they don't have an initial importer. So, and the thing is that sometimes you just don't understand what it is. The FDA says if you're a foreign manufacturing company, you will need to identify one US agent only and an initial importer. So usually the US agent, that's done when they list their product, when they register the establishment with the FDA, and by the way, the fiscal year with the FDA is from October 1st to September 30th. So it's not January 1st. So you need to renew in October your establishment registration. That's the first step to do. And then you list your product. People get confused sometimes. They say they have a product that's approved with the FDA. That's not true. If you have a class 1 or class 2 510K exam, and if you have a 510K, it's not approved. It's clear. FDA is pretty strict about this. But then, when you start shipping in the US, when product enters the US market, usually it's a two-step process. It goes to custom first. Custom review the information on commercial invoice. If everything is fine with them about the tariff code, for example, they move that to the FDA to say, hey, we have something here you need to look at. So FDA will try to see who's the initial importer. If there's none on the commercial invoice, they will reject the entry. So that's pretty important.
So one thing that I want to add to this is ISO certification. Certain products require that. But I just had a thought that I wanted to share that kind of goes in hand with what Stefan says, because he's referenced this a couple of times in terms of how important it is on the import side. One of the things that we recommend our clients look at so that it gives them how should I put it, to create greater efficiencies and streamline the process is to see if they can't find a partner who manages a warehouse and also does fulfillment at the warehouse, and preferably is in a foreign trade zone or free trade zone, because then they don't have to worry about certain taxes, at least initially in terms of inbound when the product gets shipped. And we've seen where it works really quite successful. And my whole point is that once the business gets going, it makes a lot more sense to have a larger shipment from the foreign manufacturer to the centralized warehouse. And now the centralized warehouse is working as the fulfillment center for the distribution partner, as opposed to constantly trying to send stuff directly from Germany, Spain, Australia, whatever, to the distributor, and or even trying to drop ship it. It's just more efficient, I think. They're dealing with customs once, and for example, and they're sending multiple containers over. And because they have the warehousing partner now that also will do the fulfillment, that seems to be a recipe for a really good success.
Just as a question that came in advance that we actually talked about as a group prior to the webinar was around sales tax. It sort of relates to this. This is another complication around selling in the U.S. market. Mark, I believe the short answer was you need some advice. You have some people potentially that could help with advice on that. It varies, all over the country based on state, but also the types of products, whether it's home healthcare related, whether it's used in a surgical procedure. So do you have anything you want to add to that? I know just the general answer there is reach out to you, because it's something that
Yeah.
need a deeper dive on, and it's very specific to their
Yeah,
company.
I mean, I can't tell you how much money I think people are leaving on the table. We do have a corporate attorney who's a business attorney who's very well versed in tax. We also work with an international tax accounting firm that knows how to, make sure that you're paying what you need to, but doing it in a very how should I put it, effective way. There's transfer pricing that comes into play. And this is another reason, by the way, to establish a U.S. business entity, even if you don't man it per se, doing business and having the sales transactions run through the U.S. business entity as opposed to the foreign business entity will have certain tax advantages associated with it. It also, something we didn't talk before, but it also creates a barrier for protection for the parent company. Meaning, if you're just manufacturing your products in Kazakhstan and you're selling it direct to a U.S. distributor, if for some reason something goes wrong and that distributor gets sued by the hospital, guess what? The distributor is going to turn right around and sue the manufacturer. And now, if the manufacturer doesn't have a U.S. entity, God knows what'll happen. Now, maybe because I use Kazakhstan as an example, it'll be hard to take any legal action. But let's say it's Germany, you're in trouble. And I think that when I hear about how risk averse some of the Europeans are, one of the concerns they do have is being sued. So our answer to that is set up a U.S. business entity, and then make sure that that U.S. business entity gets the right insurance, among others, liability insurance. The premiums may be a little bit higher, but if someone turns around and sues you for $1 million, all of a sudden that monthly premium of $1,000 looks pretty cheap. So I think that's something that people tend to forget, or they don't even think of. They go, well, it's the responsibility of the distributor, right? We have a sales agreement with the distributor's taking ownership of this. Oh no, that's not how it works.
Okay. That's so true. If a patient die or hospital decide to sue, they will sue everybody. Everybody. That's how the U.S. work. So make sure that, yeah, you're right, Mark.
Okay. There is actually a question in the Q&A in a related topic, which is who is handling complaints according to FDA? Is it the manufacturer or the distributor? Do either of you guys want to tackle that one? Who handles complaints to the FDA?
One of the tasks of one of the responsibility of the initial importer is reporting with the FDA. So if something happened with the product, no matter the class, the initial importer is responsible to first notify the manufacturing company, have a discussion with them, and decide what's going to be reported to the FDA. So that's the initial importer responsibility. The only exception where the initial importer will report directly to the FDA without, the manufacturing company consent is if a patient died, because then, you don't want to be in a situation where the manufacturing company will say, no, we're going to put that under the carpet. No, that's something. So that's the job of the initial importer, working hand in hand with the manufacturing company.
Okay.
To back that up, though, the ultimate, the buck stops with the manufacturer, because they're the ones who, have to deal with whatever complaint. They're the ones who originally, filed with the FDA to register the product and or to get, clearance from the FDA.
Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on time. We just have a few minutes left, and there's a few more questions. I want to group a couple of these together around reimbursement. So I'm going to ask Angela sorry to put you on the spot here, but if you can post a link to the reimbursement webinar that we did a few weeks ago. There's a question around CPT codes from Alice. I think that will be best answered in the reimbursement webinar. Thank you, Angela, for posting that. That's recorded from a couple of weeks ago that's focused specifically on reimbursement. And then there was a question related to reimbursement. Understand that we talked about it in our last webinar, but the question was, what are the chances to get those reimbursement codes or reimbursements secured before having users in the market? So I don't know if either of you want to tackle that, or
I saw that question. I go, before having users in the market, I guess what they're trying to say is before they've actually started selling their products to the intended customer. Is that, I think, what is being
I
suggested by
think
that?
so. Is it a chicken and egg kind of scenario?
So yeah, but so here's the thing. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, sets the bar. I mean, they are the gold standard, and they're the ones who establish the different codes, which then everyone plays off of, both the different hospitals, hospital networks, and the different payers, i.e., even in the private insurance companies. So in 99% of the cases, there already is a pre-existing CPT code, and it's really just a matter of the manufacturer doing some type of review to identify which code will my product fall under. In 1% of the cases, and I've had a couple of these, it turns out that the product is so novel and so new that they do not have one, and that then requires an entire process, a review process that can take up to 5 years to get a brand new CPT code assigned. Now, that doesn't mean that the company can't sell it in the meantime. The CMS will provide a provisional CPT code, but I will tell you, it is, even that takes upwards to 18 months. So, good question in that before you come into the market, make sure that the product you're selling is reimbursable. Unless, of course, I say there are exceptions. If it's a product that, maybe caters to what I'll say the lifestyles of the rich and famous, it might be a laser that's used by dermatologists, for the beauty, beautifying people. Well, now if you're living in Southern California or in Miami, Florida, the person may not care to spend $1,000 to have that procedure done. In that case, nobody cares about CPT codes.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. The link is in the chat for anyone who wants to dig into reimbursement further. There's a whole session on that. There are a couple questions around distributors. I'll take a chance to plug what we do. One of the questions was about finding possible distribution companies. That's what our big part of what our platform is. So you can find distribution partners in the U.S. You could be looking for full line or specialty, national, regional. And you can even look for, and there's a comment here, I believe it's from Doug, around there's some special unique types of distributors that have particular access in particular to Veterans Affairs and federal contracts. So Doug mentioned service disabled veteran owned small business, so STVOSB. There's also women owned small business. And we have distributors like that in the platform that are actively looking for products from foreign manufacturers. And they do have unique access to buyers. I'm just going to pause there. I'm going to share my screen again because I want to make sure everyone gets Mark and Stefan's contact information. Now, we have run out of time. We will answer any additional questions afterwards and send those out in our follow-up. Mark and Stefan's phone numbers and emails are there for you. That'll also be in the deck. They are both excellent, capable companies in the U.S. that can really help organizations like yours go to market in the U.S. For those of you that are leaving, thank you very much for your time. Stefan and Mark, thank you very much. Really appreciate the great insight today. And again, everyone on the call, please feel free to reach out to them afterwards. They were very accessible and will answer additional questions as well.